There were names that once ruled the radio, sold out arenas overnight, and defined the sound of country music for an entire generation. But when the last hits faded, not everyone was prepared for what came next. This video explores 10 country legends who lost everything after the hits stopped. No explosive scandals, no sudden collapse, just a slow, brutal disappearance from Nashville's spotlight, and the quiet unraveling of lives built on music that the industry no longer wanted. Johnny Paycheck. At his peak, Johnny Paycheck was the voice of America's working class. His songs did not ask for sympathy. They demanded respect. In the 1970s, when Take This Job and Shove It exploded across country radio, Paycheck became a symbol of rebellion against bosses, factories, and a system that chewed people up and spat them out. He was not polished, not friendly, and not built for compromise. And for a brief moment, that made him untouchable. But Johnny Paycheck's success was tied entirely to momentum. When the hits slowed, Nashville's tolerance for his chaos vanished. His behavior, once excused as outlaw attitude, became a liability. Radio programmers stopped returning calls. Promoters hesitated. Record labels quietly pulled back. The same industry that had marketed his anger now wanted nothing to do with it. As the 1980s progressed, Paycheck's income collapsed. Without hit records, touring became sporadic and humiliating. Small clubs replaced large halls. Paychecks shrank. Debts grew. His struggles with drugs and alcohol intensified, no longer masked by success. What had once been survival instincts turned into self-destruction. The final blow came when Paycheck shot a man during a dispute, an incident that landed him in prison. Nashville did not defend him. There were no rescue attempts, no comeback campaigns. When he was released, the industry had already moved on. He was no longer controversial. He was irrelevant. In his later years, Johnny Paycheck lived far from the image people remembered. The man who once sang about defiance now relied on modest performances, old royalties, and help from friends. His health deteriorated. The swagger faded. What remained was a man who had given everything to country music and received nothing back once the music stopped selling. Johnny Paycheck did not lose everything in a single moment. He lost it slowly, year by year, as silence replaced applause. His story is not about scandal. It is about what happens when an artist's identity is inseparable from success, and success quietly disappears. In the end, he became exactly what Nashville fears most, a reminder of how quickly legends can be discarded when the hits stop. David Allan Coe. David Allan Coe was never supposed to survive Nashville, let alone dominate it. He arrived as an outsider in every sense, an outlaw who lived the stories he sang. In the 1970s, Coe became a defining voice of outlaw country, writing songs that felt dangerous, raw, and unfiltered. Hits like You Never Even Called Me By My Name made him impossible to ignore. For a time, his refusal to play by the rules was not a problem. It was the product. But David Allan Coe's success depended on an industry willing to tolerate discomfort. And tolerance has an expiration date. As country music shifted toward cleaner images and radio-friendly personalities, Coe's brand became inconvenient. His refusal to soften his persona, combined with controversies surrounding his unreleased underground recordings, turned him from rebellious asset into public relations risk. Nashville did not confront him directly. They simply stopped calling. When the hits stopped, Coe's isolation began. Major labels distanced themselves, radio airplay vanished. Tour opportunities shrank, forcing him into smaller venues and long stretches without income. Unlike artists who adapted to survive, Coe doubled down on defiance. He blamed the industry, the media, and changing audiences. But anger does not pay bills. By the 1990s, David Allan Coe was largely cut off from the mainstream he once helped shape. Financial struggles mounted. Health problems followed. He lived in near isolation, often estranged from former allies and collaborators. While younger generations of artists cited him as an influence, that recognition did not translate into stability or security. What makes Coe's story especially bitter is that he was never forgotten by fans. He was forgotten by the system. Nashville rewrote history without him, celebrating the outlaw movement while quietly excluding one of its most extreme voices. He became a legend spoken about in documentaries and liner notes, but rarely supported in real life. David Allan Coe did not lose everything overnight. He lost it gradually, as the industry closed its doors one by one. His story exposes a harsh truth at the center of country music. Authenticity is celebrated only as long as it remains profitable. When the hits stop, even the most influential voices can be left completely alone. Mel Street. Mel Street built his career on heartbreak. His voice carried sorrow so convincingly that audiences believed every word he sang because much of it was already living inside him. In the early 1970s, Street became a steady presence on the country charts with songs like Borrowed Angel and Lovin' on Backstreets. He was not a flashy star, but a reliable hitmaker, respected by radio and deeply trusted by fans who heard their own pain in his music. But Mel Street's success was fragile. Unlike artists with crossover appeal or strong industry protection, his career depended almost entirely on chart momentum. When his singles stopped climbing, the support system around him collapsed quickly. Radio airplay faded, bookings slowed. Nashville's attention drifted elsewhere. For Street, there was no second lane, no reinvention strategy waiting in the wings. As the hits stopped, financial pressure mounted. Tour income dropped sharply, forcing him to perform relentlessly just to stay afloat. The emotional toll of constant travel, shrinking audiences, and declining relevance weighed heavily on him. Depression, something he had battled quietly for years, deepened as his career slipped further out of reach. The man who sang convincingly about despair was now living inside it. What made Mel Street's decline especially cruel was how invisible it was. There were no public scandals, no outrageous headlines. He was not pushed out. He simply faded away. Nashville did not publicly abandon him. They just stopped noticing him. For an artist whose identity was built on being heard, silence was devastating. In 1978, overwhelmed by depression and the sense that his career and purpose were gone, Mel Street took his own life. He was only 44 years old. His death shocked fans, but the industry moved on quickly. His songs remained on old records and jukeboxes, but his story was rarely discussed. Mel Street's tragedy exposes one of the darkest truths of country music's golden era. Emotional authenticity sold records, but it offered no protection when success disappeared. When the hits stopped, there was no safety net, no recognition of the cost paid by the artist behind the voice. He did not lose everything in a scandal or a single bad decision. He lost it when the industry stopped listening, and the silence became louder than any song he had ever recorded. Darrell Singletary. Darrell Singletary was once seen as country music's last line of defense. In the mid-1990s, when Nashville was drifting toward pop crossover sounds, Singletary emerged as a rare traditionalist. His deep voice, steel guitars, and refusal to chase trends made him stand out instantly. Songs like Too Much Fun and I Let Her Lie earned him chart success and a loyal audience that believed he represented the soul of classic country. For a brief period, Nashville embraced him as proof that traditional country could still sell. But that support was conditional. As radio playlists tightened and younger, more marketable faces took over, Singletary's commitment to tradition became a liability. He did not change his sound. He did not reinvent his image. And slowly, the industry stopped making space for him. When the hits stopped, Singletary's decline was quiet but relentless. Major label backing faded. Radio airplay dropped sharply. Tour offers became smaller and less frequent. While artists who adapted survived, Singletary chose integrity over compromise. That decision earned respect from purists, but respect does not pay mortgages or fund long tours. Financial strain followed. Singletary continued performing, often in smaller venues, fairs, and independent circuits far removed from the spotlight he once occupied. The applause remained, but the scale was different. The checks were smaller. The recognition was limited. Nashville had moved on, and it made little effort to look back. What makes Singletary's story especially painful is that he was never disgraced. He was not reckless. He was not destructive. He simply became unfashionable. In an industry that markets nostalgia while rejecting it in practice, Singletary became a reminder of values Nashville no longer prioritized. In his later years, he lived far from the mainstream and largely forgotten by the industry he had tried to protect. When Darrell Singletary died in 2018, tributes poured in from fellow musicians and longtime fans. But many asked the same question. How did someone so respected end up so alone? Darrell Singletary lost everything, not because he failed country music, but because country music changed its mind. His story exposes a brutal reality. Loyalty to tradition is celebrated in words, but punished in silence once the hits stop. Keith Whitley. Keith Whitley was supposed to be the future of country music. In the late 1980s, his voice carried a rare emotional weight, soft but devastating, rooted deeply in Appalachian tradition. Songs like Don't Close Your Eyes and When You Say Nothing at All were not just hits, they were statements. Whitley was positioned as a bridge between classic country soul and a modern audience. And for a brief moment, Nashville believed he could carry the genre forward. But Keith Whitley's success was fragile, built on momentum and timing. Behind the scenes, he struggled intensely with alcohol, long before fame found him. While his career was rising, the industry overlooked the warning signs. As long as the records sold, the problems were tolerated, even minimized. When the pressure increased and expectations grew, Whitley's internal battles became harder to hide. As his final hits reached their peak, the weight of sustaining success became overwhelming. The touring schedule intensified, the spotlight sharpened, and Whitley's dependence on alcohol deepened. Unlike artists who could disappear between albums, he was expected to deliver constantly. There was little room to pause, heal, or step away. When his productivity slowed, concern quietly turned into impatience. Although Whitley never truly reached a point where his music failed commercially, the fear of that moment haunted him. He believed the silence was coming. He believed that once the hits stopped, he would be exposed, discarded, and forgotten. That fear consumed him far more aggressively than any critic ever did. In 1989, Keith Whitley died from alcohol poisoning at just 34 years old. The industry mourned him publicly, but privately. His death exposed an uncomfortable truth. Nashville had built its hopes on his talent without protecting the man behind it. His legacy was frozen at its peak, leaving unanswered questions about what would have happened when the hits inevitably slowed. Keith Whitley did not live long enough to lose everything, but his story belongs here because he believed he would. He feared the moment when success would stop shielding his vulnerabilities. In that sense, his tragedy reveals the same brutal reality as the others. In country music, survival is often tied entirely to relevance. And for artists like Whitley, the fear of irrelevance can be just as destructive as its arrival. Lefty Frizzell was once untouchable. In the early 1950s, he was not just a star, he was a revolution. His relaxed phrasing and conversational delivery changed the way country music was sung forever. Artists like Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, and George Jones built entire careers on techniques they learned by listening to Lefty. For a time, Frizzell dominated the charts and helped define what modern country music would become. But Lefty Frizzell's decline began quietly, long before the industry acknowledged it. As new sounds emerged and younger faces took over, his chart presence weakened. The hits slowed, then they stopped. Unlike later legends who benefited from nostalgia circuits or institutional recognition, Frizzell faced his fall during a period when country music did not yet know how to honor its past. When radio moved on, financial trouble followed. Frizzell struggled with alcoholism, and without consistent hit records, his personal issues were no longer tolerated. Missed shows, broken promises, and erratic behavior turned him from valuable asset into inconvenience. Record labels distanced themselves. Booking agents lost interest. Nashville did not exile him dramatically. It simply stopped investing in him. By the 1960s, Lefty Frizzell was living far below the status of the legend he had been. He recorded sporadically, often with little promotion. His income shrank while medical and personal expenses grew. Despite his massive influence, he lacked the financial stability or industry support that later generations would enjoy. There were no safety nets for pioneers. What makes Frizzell's story especially painful is the contrast between legacy and reality. While younger artists openly credited him as their greatest inspiration, Lefty himself lived with the knowledge that inspiration did not equal security. He watched others thrive using a style he created, while his own relevance faded. Lefty Frizzell died in 1975 at just 47 years old, his health destroyed by years of alcoholism and neglect. Only after his death did Nashville fully recognize his importance. Honors, inductions, and praise arrived too late to change his fate. Lefty Frizzell lost everything not because he lacked talent, but because he arrived too early. His story exposes one of the cruelest truths in country music history. The genre celebrates its legends best after they are no longer around to benefit from it. Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was once the embodiment of country music respectability. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, his voice was everywhere. Songs like Waterloo and BJ the DJ dominated the charts, and his membership in the Grand Ole Opry signaled that he had been fully accepted by Nashville's inner circle. Jackson was not an outlaw or a rebel. He played by the rules, trusted the system, and believed loyalty would be rewarded. That belief would cost him everything. As the industry shifted in the late 1960s, Stonewall Jackson's sound began to feel old-fashioned. Radio playlists changed. Younger artists replaced familiar voices. The hits slowed, then disappeared entirely. But unlike many artists, Jackson did not self-destruct or withdraw. He waited. He trusted that the industry he had served would take care of him. Instead, it quietly erased him. By the 1970s, Jackson found himself struggling financially. Touring income was inconsistent, and royalties from older hits were far smaller than fans assumed. What hurt most was not just the loss of success, but the loss of dignity. The Grand Ole Opry, once his professional home, reduced his appearances and eventually sidelined him altogether. For an artist whose identity was built around belonging, this rejection was devastating. As his health declined, Stonewall Jackson became involved in a long legal battle with the Opry, accusing it of age discrimination and unfair treatment. The lawsuit made headlines, but it did not restore his career. Nashville closed ranks. Doors that were already barely open slammed shut completely. Jackson was no longer a respected elder. He was labeled a problem. In his later years, he lived far from the spotlight, struggling with illness and financial insecurity. The industry rarely acknowledged his contributions. Fans remembered his songs, but few understood how badly he had been pushed aside. Stonewall Jackson was not destroyed by scandal, addiction, or controversy. He was destroyed by institutional neglect. When he died in 2011, tributes briefly resurfaced, praising his influence and chart success. But the praise came after decades of silence. His story reveals one of the harshest realities of country music. Even those who follow every rule can be discarded once they stop generating profit. Stonewall Jackson lost everything not by rebelling against Nashville, but by trusting it. And when the hits stopped, loyalty meant nothing. Billy Joe Shaver. Billy Joe Shaver helped define outlaw country, yet he never truly escaped poverty. In the 1970s, his songwriting shaped an entire movement. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson recorded his songs, turning Shaver's words into hits that sold millions. Albums like Honky Tonk Heroes became cornerstones of country music history. To outsiders, it looked like success. To Shaver, it barely paid the rent. Unlike the artists who performed his songs, Billy Joe Shaver never benefited fully from the machine he helped build. His own recording career struggled to gain momentum. While his lyrics fueled other people's fame, his albums sold modestly, and radio rarely embraced him as a solo artist. Nashville admired his talent, but admiration did not translate into protection or stability. When the hits stopped coming for others, many still had savings, catalogs, and industry leverage. Shaver had none of that. As outlaw country faded from the mainstream, so did his opportunities. Touring became irregular. Advances disappeared. He lived for long stretches in near poverty, relying on small gigs, personal resilience, and stubborn pride. There was no dramatic fall. There was simply never a safety net. Personal tragedy compounded the struggle. Shaver lost his son Eddie, his longtime musical partner, in 2000. The loss devastated him emotionally and financially. Music, once his refuge, became a reminder of everything he had lost. Still, he kept writing. Still, he kept performing, not because it paid well, but because it was all he had left. In later years, Billy Joe Shaver gained renewed critical respect. Younger artists cited him as a legend. Documentaries praised his influence. But recognition came late, and money rarely followed praise. He remained a symbol of artistic purity, trapped in a system that rewards performance more than creation. What makes Shaver's story especially cruel is that he did everything right artistically. He wrote honestly. He lived his songs. He influenced giants. Yet, when the industry moved on, he was left behind, financially exposed and emotionally worn down. His legend grew while his circumstances remained fragile. Billy Joe Shaver did not lose everything after the hits stopped. He never truly had it to begin with. And that may be the most brutal lesson of all. In country music, shaping the sound does not guarantee survival once the spotlight fades. Tom T. Hall. Tom T. Hall was never built for noise. He was a storyteller, quiet, observant, and devastatingly precise. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, his songs dominated country radio because they sounded like real life. Harper Valley PTA, I Love, and That's How I Got to Memphis turned ordinary moments into national hits. Hall was not flashy, but he was trusted. For a time, Nashville needed him because he could say what others could not. But Tom T. Hall's success rested on something fragile: attention. And attention in Nashville never lasts. As country music moved toward bigger production, louder personalities, and more commercial formulas, Hall began to feel out of place. His writing did not change, but the audience did. The hits slowed, then stopped. Radio programmers labeled his work too quiet for modern playlists. Record labels lost interest in subtlety. What had once made him special became a reason to move on. Unlike many artists, Hall did not fight the system. He simply stepped away. As industry support faded, he grew increasingly disillusioned with Nashville itself. He saw country music becoming something he no longer recognized, and he refused to chase trends he did not believe in. The decision preserved his integrity, but it came at a cost. Financially, Hall was more stable than some of his peers, but emotionally, the separation was profound. He withdrew from public life, stopped performing regularly, and lived in near isolation. The applause disappeared. Interviews stopped. For an artist whose entire identity was built on being heard, the silence felt intentional. He was not pushed out loudly. He was replaced quietly. What makes Tom T. Hall's story painful is that he was still capable of greatness. His writing never declined. The industry simply decided it no longer had room for someone who refused to simplify life into 3-minute hooks. Nashville continued to celebrate storytelling in theory while abandoning one of its greatest storytellers in practice. In his later years, Hall lived far from the spotlight, rarely appearing in public. When he died in 2021, tributes poured in, calling him a genius, a poet, a legend. But the praise raised an uncomfortable question. Where was this respect when he was still here? Tom T. Hall lost everything that mattered to him, not because he failed, but because he no longer belonged to the version of country music that replaced him. His story proves that sometimes losing everything does not look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like being quietly erased when the hits stop. Hank Williams Jr. For most of his life, Hank Williams Jr. lived under a name that was both a blessing and a curse. As the son of Hank Williams, he was expected to carry a legacy that was already untouchable. After years of struggling to escape that shadow, he finally succeeded in the late 1970s and 1980s. With his Southern rock-influenced sound, rebellious image, and massive anthems, Hank Jr. became one of the biggest stars in country music. For a long time, it seemed like he had beaten the system. But even legends with long careers are not immune to silence. As the decades passed, Hank Williams Jr.'s dominance began to fade. His sound, once explosive, no longer fit neatly into Nashville's evolving radio format. The hits slowed, album sales softened, younger artists replaced him on playlists and award stages. While he still had a loyal fan base, the industry's enthusiasm cooled. For the first time, Hank Jr. faced a version of irrelevance he had spent his entire life running from. The real fracture came when controversy replaced momentum. After public comments that drew widespread backlash, corporate partners and broadcasters distanced themselves almost instantly. Contracts were suspended. Appearances vanished. In a matter of days, Hank Jr. experienced what many lesser artists had endured for years: silence. The machine did not argue with him. It simply stepped away. Financially, Hank Williams Jr. did not end up poor. But losing everything does not always mean losing money. He lost platform. He lost institutional support. He lost the protection that comes with being useful to the industry. For an artist whose identity was built on defiance and independence, the sudden cold shoulder exposed how fragile even established power can be once relevance is questioned. What makes Hank Jr.'s story essential to this list is contrast. Unlike others, he survived. He still performs. His name still matters. But there was a clear moment when Nashville proved it could function perfectly well without him. The hits were no longer enough, the legacy was no longer enough, and the door closed without hesitation. Hank Williams Jr. did not lose everything forever, but he lost the illusion that legends are safe. His experience reveals the final truth behind this entire video. In country music, longevity does not guarantee loyalty. The system respects only one thing: momentum. And when the hits stop, even the strongest names can feel how close everything really is to disappearing.